space station Concordia hung in the void like a metal flower, its petals of steel and glass catching the light from distant stars. Ambassador Sarah Chen looked through the observation window at the massive structure as her shuttle approached. She had seen many wonders in her 30 years of diplomatic service, but Concordia never failed to impress her. This neutral station was humanity's greatest achievement in galactic politics. Here, wars ended and peace began. Sarah adjusted her formal diplomatic robes and checked her notes one last time. Today's meeting with the Catherian Empire could change everything. For months, the Catherians had been testing human borders, sending their war fleets to probe Earth's defenses. Their ships would appear at the edge of human space, scan everything they could, and then disappear before anyone could respond. It was like being poked by a stick over and over again. The Catherians called themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy. They were tall, with gray skin and forearms that ended in sharp claws. Their society was built around war and conquest. They believed that might made right, and they looked down on any species that preferred talking to fighting. To them, diplomacy was a sign of weakness. Sarah's shuttle docked at Concordia with a soft bump. She gathered her documents and walked through the airlock. The station's main hall was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Representatives from dozens of species walked through the corridors, their different shapes and sizes creating a rainbow of galactic diversity. Captain Torres, her security chief, fell into step beside her. "The Catherians arrived an hour ago," he said quietly. "They brought a full war delegation. 50 soldiers, all armed." Sarah nodded. She had expected this. The Catherians never went anywhere without showing their strength. "Any unusual behavior?" "They've been loud, making comments about human weakness to anyone who will listen." "The usual," Sarah sighed. She had dealt with the Catherians before. They loved to insult and intimidate. It was their way of testing opponents before real negotiations began. The key was to stay calm and not react to their provocations. They reached the main conference room. The doors were massive, carved with symbols from every major galactic civilization. As they opened, Sarah saw the Catherian delegation waiting inside. Their leader, Warcast Vexthor, stood at the center of his group like a statue made of muscle and scars. His forearms were crossed and his yellow eyes fixed on Sarah the moment she entered. Vexthor was a giant even by Catherian standards. His gray skin was covered in ritual scars that told the story of his battles. Each scar represented an enemy he had killed in single combat. Sarah counted dozens of them. "So," Vexthor's voice rumbled like distant thunder, "the humans send us a female. Is this another sign of your species' weakness?" Sarah kept her face calm. "I am Ambassador Sarah Chen, representative of the Terran Federation. I come here seeking peace between our peoples." Vexthor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. His soldiers joined in, their claws clicking against their weapons. "Peace, always you humans speak of peace. Do you know what we call peace in our language? We call it the time between wars." "Perhaps," Sarah said, moving to her seat at the conference table. "That's why this meeting is so important." Other diplomats from neutral species took their places around the table. The Altarian mediator, a being that looked like a walking tree, called the session to order. "We gather today to discuss the border disputes between the Terran Federation and the Catherian Empire. Let us begin with—" "Wait," Vexthor interrupted, rising from his chair. "Before we begin this talking, there is a tradition we must observe." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't in any of the briefing documents. "What tradition?" Vexthor smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "Among warriors, we show respect through blood. It is an ancient custom." He drew a curved blade from his belt. The metal gleamed under the conference room lights. The other diplomats shifted nervously in their seats. The Altarian mediator's branches rustled. "Warcast Vexthor, this is a diplomatic meeting. Weapons or not, this is not a weapon," Vexthor said smoothly. "This is a ceremonial blade, used only for sacred rituals." He looked directly at Sarah. "Surely the human ambassador will not refuse to honor our traditions." Sarah knew this was a trap. If she refused, the Catherians would claim she had insulted their culture. They would use it as an excuse to walk away from negotiations. But something in Vexthor's eyes told her this was more than just a ceremony. "What does this tradition involve?" she asked carefully. "Simple. We share blood. Warrior to warrior. A small cut on the hand, nothing more." Vexthor's smile grew wider. Unless, of course, the human is too afraid? Sarah looked around the room. The other diplomats watched her with worried expressions. Captain Torres had his hand on his weapon, but she shook her head slightly. Starting a fight here would end any chance of peace. Very well, Sarah said, standing up. I accept your tradition. She walked around the table to where Vexthor waited. He held out the ceremonial blade, handle first. As she reached for it, his other 3 hands moved faster than lightning. Pain exploded through Sarah's hand as Vexthor's claws raked across her palm and fingers. The ceremonial blade dropped to the floor as she gasped. Blood flowed between her fingers, dripping onto the polished conference table. But Vexthor wasn't finished. His claws had torn through tendons and muscle. Sarah tried to move her fingers, but they wouldn't respond. She looked down at her hand in shock. It was mangled, twisted into an unnatural shape. Oops, Vexthor said with mock concern. How clumsy of me. I hope the human can still hold a pen to sign surrender documents. The room erupted. The Altarian mediator was shouting in 3 different languages. Captain Torres had his weapon drawn, but Catherian soldiers had theirs ready too. Other diplomats were backing away from the table. Sarah stood perfectly still, looking down at her ruined hand. The pain was incredible, but she forced herself not to cry out. She could feel Vexthor watching her, waiting for her to break down, to show weakness. Instead, she looked up and met his yellow eyes. Is the ceremony complete? Vexthor's smile faltered for just a moment. He had expected screaming, tears, or at least some sign of defeat. But Sarah just stood there, blood dripping from her destroyed hand, staring at him with quiet dignity. Yes, he said finally. The ceremony is complete. Good. Sarah picked up a cloth from the table and wrapped it around her hand. The white fabric turned red immediately. Then let us begin negotiations. She walked back to her seat and sat down as if nothing had happened. The other diplomats stared at her in amazement. Captain Torres was speaking rapidly into his communicator, calling for medical help. Vexthor remained standing, confused by her reaction. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Humans were supposed to be weak, emotional, easily broken, but this human female had just taken what should have been a crippling injury and acted like it was nothing. Perhaps, Sarah said calmly, looking around the table, we should discuss the real issues between our peoples. Unless, of course, there are any other traditions we need to observe first. The silence in the room was deafening. Medical personnel arrived and began treating Sarah's hand, but she never took her eyes off Vexthor. What neither Sarah nor Vexthor knew was that Catherian recording. Devices had captured every moment of the ceremony. Those recordings were already being transmitted across their empire, shared as proof of human weakness. They had no idea that the same recordings would soon reach Earth, where they would be seen by 7 billion humans who had very different ideas about what they proved. The news reached Earth faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours of the incident at Concordia, every major news network in human space was broadcasting the footage. The images were crystal clear. Ambassador Sarah Chen standing calmly while a Catherian warrior deliberately destroyed her hand, then continuing with negotiations as if nothing had happened. Admiral Marcus Webb was in his office aboard the Orbital Station High Command when his aide burst through the door without knocking. Sir, you need to see this immediately. Webb looked up from his reports, annoyed. Lieutenant Park was usually very professional. For her to interrupt like this meant something serious had happened. What is it? It's Ambassador Chen, sir. The Catherians. They hurt her. Park's hand shook as she activated the wall screen. They're calling it a ceremony. Webb watched the footage in silence. His face remained calm, but his hands slowly clenched into fists. He had known Sarah Chen for 15 years. She had negotiated the peace treaties that ended the colonial wars. She had talked 3 different species out of declaring war on humanity. She was the best diplomat the Federation had ever produced, and now she was sitting in a medical bay on Concordia with a hand that would never work properly again. How bad is the injury? Webb asked quietly. Severe. The doctors say she'll need months of surgery and therapy. She might regain 30% function if she's lucky. Park's voice was tight with anger. Sir, they recorded it. They're broadcasting it across their empire as entertainment. Webb stood up and walked to the window. Below him, Earth turned slowly in the darkness of space. Somewhere down there, Sarah's family was probably watching the same footage. Her daughter was only 10 years old. Have you shown this to anyone else? Webb asked. No, sir. I came straight to you. Good. Send a copy to General Tanaka and Admiral Asante. Mark it highest priority. Then schedule an emergency meeting of the War Council in 1 hour. Sir, what should I tell them the meeting is about? Webb turned back to his aide. For just a moment, Lieutenant Park saw something in his eyes that made her take a step backward. It was like looking into the heart of a star. Tell them it's about response protocols. As Park left to carry out her orders, Webb sat back down at his desk. He pulled up Sarah Chen's personnel file and read through it again. Decorated diplomat, survivor of the Titan colony massacre, mother, friend, a woman who had spent her entire career trying to keep humanity at peace with the galaxy. The door chimed, and Webb's secretary announced a call from Earth. Admiral, it's Director Harrison from the Federal Council. Webb accepted the call. Director Harrison's face appeared on his screen, and Webb could see the strain in the older man's eyes. Marcus, have you seen the footage? I have. The Council is meeting an emergency session. Some members want to recall all our diplomats immediately. Others want to file formal protests with the Galactic Assembly. What's your recommendation? Webb was quiet for a long moment. Sarah Chen has served the Federation for 30 years. She's prevented more wars than any person in human history. And yesterday, aliens mutilated her on camera because they thought it would be funny. I know, Marcus, but we have to be careful. The Catherians have 3 times as many ships as we do. Their technology is more advanced. If this turns into a shooting war, then it turns into a shooting war. Webb's voice was flat, emotionless. Sir, with respect, the Catherians just told the entire galaxy that they can hurt our people whenever they want, and there will be no consequences. If we don't respond, every species out there will think humans are easy targets. What kind of response are you talking about? I'll have recommendations after the War Council meeting. Harrison nodded slowly. Whatever you're planning, Marcus, remember that Sarah Chen is a diplomat. She believes in peace. Don't let anger cloud your judgment. The call ended and Webb leaned back in his chair. Outside his window, ships moved in their orbits around Earth. Cargo vessels, passenger liners, research ships. The peaceful traffic of a civilization that preferred building to destroying. But hidden among them were other ships. Warships with weapons that could crack planets. Carriers loaded with fighters and marines. Submarines that could slip through space without being detected. All of them waited quietly, their crews going about routine duties, not knowing that everything was about to change. Webb's aide returned. Sir, the footage is spreading fast. It's on every human news channel now. Social media is intense. Show me. The wall screen filled with clips from news broadcasts. Angry commentators. Politicians calling for action. But it was the social media posts that really caught Webb's attention. Thousands of them pouring in every minute, all saying the same thing in different ways. They heard our ambassador. This cannot stand. Time to show them what humans are really capable of. Webb recognized the tone. He had heard it before, during the worst days of the colonial wars. It was the sound of humanity getting angry, really angry. His communicator buzzed. General Yuki Tanaka's face appeared on the small screen. Marcus, I just saw the footage. Do we have authorization? Not yet, but I think we will soon. My Marines are ready. Just say the word. The communicator buzzed again. This time it was Admiral Kofi Asante, calling from Deep Space Command. Webb, my reconnaissance ships have been tracking Catherian fleet movements. They're pulling back from our borders. Why would they do that? I think they're expecting us to do something stupid. They want us to charge straight at their main fleet so they can destroy us in a conventional battle. Webb smiled for the first time since seeing the footage. Then we won't give them what they expect. An hour later, the 3 most powerful military officers in human space sat around a secure conference table. The walls of the meeting room were covered with star charts and fleet positions. Everything they said here would be classified for the next 100 years. Options, Webb said simply. General Tanaka spoke first. Limited response. We hit a few border outposts, make some noise, then negotiate from a position of strength. Admiral Asante shook his head.
That's not enough.
They maimed our ambassador on camera. The galaxy is watching. If we don't respond appropriately, every 2-bit warlord in the outer systems will think humans are easy prey. What do you recommend? Webb asked. Asante leaned forward. Total war. We don't just hit their military targets. We destroy their ability to make war. Their shipyards, their supply lines, their command structure, everything. Tanaka raised an eyebrow. That's a big escalation, Kofi. Once we start something like that, there's no going back. Good, Asante replied. I don't want to go back. I want every species in the galaxy to understand that if you hurt humans, there will be consequences. Webb studied the star charts. The Catherian Empire controlled over 200 systems. Their fleets were powerful and their warriors were experienced. In a straight fight, humanity would probably lose. But humans didn't fight straight fights. There's a third option, Webb said quietly. We don't fight them like they expect. We fight them like humans. He stood up and pointed to a cluster of systems on the edge of Catherian space. They think they know how we fight because they've studied our civil wars. But they've never seen us fight an external enemy. They don't understand what we're really capable of. Tanaka and Asante exchanged glances. They both knew what Webb was thinking. During the colonial wars, human tactics had been brutal but effective. Entire populations had been turned against their governments through psychological warfare. Supply lines had been destroyed by sabotage rather than direct attack. Enemy leaders had simply vanished in the night. Are we sure about this? Tanaka asked. Once we cross this line. Webb thought about Sarah Chen sitting in a medical bay with a hand that would never heal properly. He thought about the Catherian warriors laughing as they recorded her pain. He thought about every human diplomat who would now have to negotiate, while their opponents wondered if they could be hurt without consequences. They started this when they decided to make an example of our ambassador, Webb said. We're going to finish it by making an example of them. The meeting lasted 3 more hours. When it ended, orders began flowing to ships and bases across human space. Most of the crews receiving those orders had no idea what they were preparing for. They just knew that their routines had suddenly changed, that their ships were being loaded with supplies and weapons, that their officers had become very serious very quickly. The Catherians, monitoring human communications, saw increased military activity but dismissed it as posturing. Their intelligence analysts predicted that humanity would file protests, maybe impose trade sanctions, possibly even attack a few border outposts. They had no idea that humans had just decided to teach the galaxy a lesson that would be remembered for 1,000 years. The orders came down through classified channels at 0300 Earth Standard Time. Captain Elena Vasquez read hers twice before she fully understood what she was being asked to do. Then she called her senior officers to the bridge of the destroyer Relentless. We're changing course, she announced to her crew. New orders from High Command. Her navigation officer looked confused. Ma'am, we're supposed to be conducting training exercises near Proxima Station. Not anymore. Vasquez pulled up a star chart on the main screen. We're heading for the Catherian border, along with everyone else. Across human space, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of ships. Cargo vessels that had been carrying grain suddenly found themselves loaded with ammunition. Research ships were equipped with sensor arrays designed for military reconnaissance. Even civilian passenger liners were quietly converted to troop transports. Admiral Webb watched the coordinated movement from his command center. Status reports flowed across his screens in a steady stream. Fleet movements that looked random to outside observers were actually part of a carefully planned dance. Phase 1 is proceeding on schedule, his aide reported. All ships are maintaining normal communication protocols. The Catherians don't seem to suspect anything, Webb nodded. The key to the entire plan was surprise. For the next 72 hours, every human ship had to appear to be going about normal business, while secretly moving into position for the largest military operation in human history. On the planet below, the news about Ambassador Chen continued to dominate every broadcast. Protesters gathered outside government buildings, demanding action. Editorial writers called for everything from economic sanctions to immediate military strikes. Politicians gave speeches about human dignity and the need for measured responses. What none of them knew was that the response had already been decided. General Tanaka was aboard the assault carrier Tokyo, reviewing attack plans with her Marine commanders. Her force consisted of 50,000 of the best soldiers humanity had ever produced. They had trained for urban warfare, zero-gravity combat, and operations in hostile environments. Some of them were veterans of the colonial wars. Others had never seen real combat. All of them had watched the footage of Ambassador Chen. The Catherians think they understand human military tactics, Tanaka told her officers. They've studied our civil wars, our training exercises, our peacekeeping operations. They think they know how we fight. Colonel Matthews, her senior ground commander, raised his hand. What don't they know, General? They don't know what we're like when we're angry. Meanwhile, Admiral Asante was coordinating the largest naval operation in human history from his flagship, the battleship Sovereign. His screens showed the positions of over 800 human vessels, all converging on predetermined coordinates near Cytherian space. The Cytherians had superior technology and more ships, but they had one critical weakness: they fought like Cytherians. Their tactics were based on honor, direct confrontation, and massive displays of force. They challenged enemies to single combat and respected opponents who showed courage in battle. Humans had learned to fight very differently. Status report on the Shadow Fleet. Asante ordered. His intelligence officer checked her displays. 250 ships now in stealth configuration. They're using the asteroid fields and gas clouds along the border for cover. Cytherian sensors haven't detected them. Asante smiled grimly. The Shadow Fleet was composed of ships that officially didn't exist. Some were prototype vessels built in secret shipyards. Others were old warships that had been reported as decommissioned, but were actually hidden in deep space. A few were captured alien vessels that had been reverse-engineered and modified. The Cytherians had counted human ships and calculated their chances of victory, but they had only counted the ships they could see. Back on Concordia, Ambassador Chen was recovering from her third surgery. The doctors had managed to restore some function to her hand, but it would never be the same. She could hold a pen, but writing was painful and slow. She could shake hands, but her grip was weak. Captain Torres sat beside her bed reading reports on his tablet. "The news networks are calling you a hero," he said. "Someone started a petition to have a ship named after you. It already has 2 million signatures." Chen tried to smile, but the pain medication made her feel disconnected from everything. "Any word from Earth about the negotiations?" Torres hesitated. "The Cytherians walked out yesterday. They said they had made their point and saw no need for further discussions." Chen closed her eyes. Months of preparation, years of delicate relationship building, all destroyed in a single moment of brutality. So they got what they wanted. "Maybe," Torres said quietly. "Or maybe they got more than they bargained for." Something in his tone made Chen look at him more carefully. "What do you mean?" Torres glanced around the medical bay to make sure they were alone. "I'm not supposed to tell you this, but High Command has been sending out a lot of classified orders in the past few days. Ships are moving. Marines are being deployed. Something big is happening." Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with her injuries. She knew Admiral Webb well enough to understand how he thought. Marcus Webb was a good man and a brilliant strategist, but he had one weakness. He took attacks on his people very personally. "They're not going to do anything stupid, are they?" she asked. Torres was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, with respect, I think the Cytherians already did something stupid." Across the galaxy, Cytherian intelligence analysts were filing reports with their superiors. Human fleet movements had increased, but this was expected after a diplomatic incident. Some ships had changed course toward the border, but they appeared to be taking defensive positions. Warcast Vexthor reviewed these reports from his flagship with satisfaction. The humans were responding exactly as predicted. They were moving ships around, making threatening gestures, trying to look strong, but they hadn't actually done anything. "The human response has been pathetic," he told his subordinates. "A few protests, some ship movements, nothing more. They are exactly as weak as we believed." His intelligence chief, a scarred veteran named Korath, seemed less certain. "Warcast, human ship movements appear random, but there might be a pattern we're not seeing." Vexthor dismissed this with a wave of his clawed hand. "You worry too much, Korath. Humans fight like humans have always fought. Slowly, carefully, with too much concern for casualties. They will spend weeks preparing for an attack that we can see, coming from 1,000 light years away." What Vexthor didn't know was that human military doctrine had evolved far beyond anything the Cytherians had studied. The colonial wars had taught humanity painful lessons about the cost of conventional warfare. New tactics had been developed, tested in classified exercises, and refined through decades of secret preparation. The galaxy was about to learn what those tactics looked like in practice. Admiral Webb received the final status reports at 1800 hours Earth Standard Time. Every ship was in position. Every team knew their objectives. Every commander understood that the success of the operation depended on perfect timing and absolute surprise. He thought about Ambassador Chen, probably lying in a hospital bed somewhere, wondering if her sacrifice had been worth anything. He thought about every human diplomat who would face alien negotiators in the future. He thought about the message this operation would send to every species in the galaxy. Then he opened a secure channel to all ships and gave the order that would change galactic politics forever. All units. This is High Command. Operation Thunderbolt is now active. Begin Phase 2 immediately. Across human space, ships that had been pretending to conduct routine operations suddenly dropped their civilian disguises. Weapon systems came online. Stealth fields activated. Navigation computers locked onto targets that were light years away. The Catherians had studied human warfare and decided they understood it. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. The first Catherian patrol to die never knew what hit them. The destroyer Corvin was conducting a routine sweep of the border when space around them suddenly filled with missile trails. The ship's captain had just enough time to order evasive maneuvers before his vessel was torn apart by explosions. In the Catherian command center on their homeworld, alarms began sounding as more patrol ships went silent. Fleet Admiral Thekmar studied the tactical displays with growing concern. Human ships had appeared throughout Catherian space as if they had materialized out of nothing. "How many vessels?" he demanded. "Unknown, Admiral. Our sensors are showing impossible readings. Ships are appearing where our scouts reported empty space just hours ago." Thekmar's forearms clenched into fists. "Deploy the Second Fleet to investigate these incursions." But as his orders went out, more reports came flooding in. Human forces weren't just attacking patrol ships. They were hitting supply convoys, communication relays, and isolated outposts. Each strike was swift, brutal, and perfectly timed. Admiral Webb watched the operation unfold from his command center. Status reports flowed across his screens in a steady stream of green lights. Every target was being hit exactly on schedule. "Phase 2 complete," his aide reported. "All border defenses neutralized." Moving to Phase 3, Webb nodded. The Catherians were about to learn the first lesson of human warfare. Never assume you know where your enemy is. Captain Vasquez guided the destroyer, relentless through the asteroid field that bordered the Kepler system. Her ship was one of 50 vessels that had been hiding in the rocks for 3 days, using the asteroid's metal content to mask their sensor signatures. "Target acquired," her weapons officer reported. "Catherian supply depot, just like the intelligence report said." Vasquez studied the tactical display. The depot was massive, designed to service the entire Catherian Third Fleet. Destroying it would cripple enemy operations in this sector for months. "All ships, commence attack run." The hidden human fleet burst from the asteroid field like avenging angels. The Catherian depot's defenses were designed to stop a direct assault, not an attack from ships that appeared without warning at close range. Explosions bloomed across the facility as missiles found their targets. Similar scenes were playing out across 100 systems. Human forces that the Catherians didn't know existed were destroying targets they didn't know were vulnerable. Each attack was precisely planned and ruthlessly executed. On the assault carrier Tokyo, General Tanaka watched her Marines prepare for their part of the operation. Unlike the naval attacks, her mission required precision rather than destruction. "Remember," she told her troops over the comm system, "we're not here to conquer territory. We're here to send a message." The Tokyo approached the Catherian fortress world of Grimak 3 under cover of a debris field left by an ancient asteroid impact. The planet's defenses were focused outward, designed to stop an invasion fleet. Not a single ship approaching through the debris. Tanaka's Marines deployed in small teams, using personal stealth fields to avoid detection. Their target wasn't the planet's military installations. It was something much more important to Catherian psychology. High above the planet's capital city stood the Hall of Victories, a massive monument to Catherian military triumphs. Inside the hall were the weapons and armor of defeated enemies displayed as trophies of war. Every Catherian warrior dreamed of having their victories recorded in this sacred place. The Marines reached the hall just before dawn. They disabled the security systems, neutralized the guards, and placed their charges with surgical precision. As the sun rose over the capital, the Hall of Victories vanished in a controlled explosion that left no casualties, but erased 10,000 years of Catherian military history. The psychological impact was immediate. Across the Catherian Empire, news of the Hall's destruction spread faster than official communications. For a warrior culture that valued military honor above everything else, the loss was devastating. But the humans weren't finished. Admiral Asante's shadow fleet had spent 3 days infiltrating Catherian space using routes that intelligence had identified but never shared with enemy forces. Now his ships emerged from hyperspace in the heart of the Empire, appearing in orbit around worlds that had never seen an enemy vessel. The Catherians had assumed their core systems were safe. They had positioned their fleets on the borders, ready to fight a conventional war against an approaching enemy. They never imagined that the enemy would simply bypass their defenses and strike at the heart of their civilization. But Asante's ships didn't attack the planets. Instead, they deployed thousands of small drones that spread across each system, documenting everything. Military installations, civilian populations, industrial facilities. The drones recorded it all in perfect detail, then transmitted the data back to human space before self-destructing. The message was clear. We can reach anywhere we want, anytime we want. If we had wanted to destroy your worlds, we could have. Warcast Vexthor received the reports aboard his flagship with growing rage. The humans had made a mockery of Catherian defenses. They had destroyed the Hall of Victories, the most sacred site in the Empire. They had demonstrated that no Catherian world was safe from attack. Impossible, he roared at his intelligence chief. Humans don't fight like this. They're too weak, too concerned with avoiding casualties. Koreth studied the tactical displays with professional interest. Warcast, perhaps our assessment of human capabilities was incomplete. They got lucky. Vexthor's claws scraped against the metal of his chair. They used tricks and deception instead of honorable warfare. Deploy all fleets. We'll crush them in open battle. But as Catherian fleets moved to engage the human forces, they found nothing but empty space. The human ships had vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving only destroyed installations and a growing sense of dread among Catherian commanders. On Concordia, Ambassador Chen watched news reports of the attacks with a mixture of amazement and horror. She had known Marcus Webb for 15 years, but she had never seen him orchestrate anything like this. Casualty reports? She asked Captain Torres. Surprisingly low, he replied. The humans seemed to be avoiding civilian targets. They're focusing on military and symbolic objectives. Chen nodded slowly. That was typical of Webb's thinking. He wasn't trying to conquer the Catherian Empire. He was trying to break their will to fight by demonstrating human capabilities while avoiding the massive casualties that would make peace impossible later. But she also knew that the Catherians wouldn't understand the restraint being shown. To their way of thinking, showing mercy was a sign of weakness. They're going to escalate, she said quietly. Torres looked at her with concern. Ma'am? The Catherians. They'll see this as a challenge to their honor. They'll respond with everything they have. As if to confirm her prediction, reports began coming in of massive Catherian fleet movements. Every ship in their empire was being deployed for what their leaders were calling the final battle against humanity. Chen closed her eyes and tried not to think about what would happen when two civilizations that had very different ideas about warfare finally met in open combat. Admiral Webb received the intelligence reports with grim satisfaction. The Catherians were doing exactly what he had expected. They were gathering their fleets for a massive assault on human space, planning to overwhelm Earth's defenses through sheer numbers and superior firepower. They still didn't understand what they were really fighting. All units, Webb transmitted on secure channels. Prepare for Phase 4. The enemy is coming to us. Across human space, defensive preparations that had been decades in the making finally activated. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as research stations powered up their guns. Minefields that had been seeded throughout empty space armed their warheads. Ships that had been hiding in the outer reaches of solar systems began moving toward predetermined positions. The Catherians thought they were about to fight a conventional space battle. They had no idea they were flying into the most sophisticated trap in military history. The final phase of Operation Thunderbolt was about to begin, and when it ended, the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The Catherian Armada was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 3,000 ships of every class, from massive dreadnoughts to swift destroyers, moved through hyperspace toward Earth. At their head flew the flagship Eternal Victory, where Warcast Vexthor planned the final destruction of humanity. Once we reach human space, he told his fleet commanders, We will demonstrate the price of defying the Empire. Every human world will burn until they surrender unconditionally. His officers clicked their claws in approval. The sneak attacks had been embarrassing, but now the humans would face Catherian might in open battle. It would be a glorious victory that would be remembered for 10,000 years. What Vexthor didn't know was that Admiral Webb had been counting on exactly this response. The human defensive fleet was pathetically small by comparison. Only 800 ships guarded the approaches to Earth, and many of those were older vessels that should have been retired years ago. To any objective observer, the coming battle looked like a massacre. Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dreadnought Defiant, and watched the approaching enemy on his tactical displays. Around him, his officers maintained the calm professionalism that had made the human fleet legendary, but he could sense their tension. Enemy fleet will reach the outer perimeter in 30 minutes, his tactical officer reported. Signal all ships, Webb ordered. Execute Plan Lazarus. Across the human fleet, ships that had seemed outmatched and obsolete suddenly revealed their true nature. Cargo vessels deployed fighter squadrons that had been hidden in their holds. Research ships activated weapon systems that had been disguised as scientific equipment. Even civilian vessels began launching missiles from concealed launchers. But the real surprise was waiting in the asteroid fields and nebulae that dotted the solar system. Hidden there were the weapons platforms that human engineers had been building in secret for decades. Each platform was small enough to avoid detection, but powerful enough to cripple a battleship. The Catherian fleet burst into human space expecting to find a desperate defense. Instead, they flew into a killing field that had been prepared for exactly this moment. Warcast Vexthor watched in disbelief as his vanguard ships began exploding. Missiles appeared from every direction, launched by weapons platforms that his sensors couldn't even see. His tactical displays showed human ships where none should exist, and empty space where enemy vessels had been moments before. "What is happening?" he roared at his sensor operators. "Unknown, Warcast. Our sensors are detecting impossible readings. It appears the entire system is armed with hidden weapons." On the Defiant, Admiral Webb coordinated the battle with the same calm precision he had shown throughout his career. This wasn't a conventional space battle. It was an execution platform. 7-7 reporting successful strike on enemy dreadnought. Came a voice over the comm system. "Confirmed. Kill on enemy carrier," reported another platform. The Catherians had expected to fight ship to ship, fleet to fleet, in the honorable tradition of galactic warfare. Instead, they found themselves being torn apart by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't target, and couldn't understand. Vexthor ordered his ships to advance toward Earth, hoping to close the range and force a traditional battle. But as his fleet moved deeper into the solar system, the trap closed around them completely. General Tanaka's Marines had been waiting in the outer asteroid belt for 3 days. As Catherian ships passed their hidden positions, the Marines deployed boarding pods, attaching them to enemy hulls with magnetic clamps. Within minutes, elite human soldiers were fighting their way through Catherian ships, targeting command centers and engineering sections. The Catherians were excellent warriors in single combat, but they had never faced soldiers trained in close-quarters battle aboard starships. Human Marines moved through the narrow corridors of alien vessels like deadly shadows, using tactics that Catherian honor codes had never contemplated. Admiral Asante's Deep Strike Force chose this moment to emerge from hyperspace behind the Catherian fleet. The shadow ships that had been harassing enemy territory for days now appeared in the rear of the armada. Catching them between two forces, the Catherians found themselves surrounded, outnumbered by enemies they hadn't known existed, fighting a battle they didn't understand against opponents who refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. On Concordia, Ambassador Chen watched the battle reports with a mixture of awe and sadness. Her ruined hand ached as she read about ships being destroyed and lives being lost. This was what her diplomatic mission had been supposed to prevent. "Status report," she asked Captain Torres. "The Catherian fleet is being systematically destroyed. Admiral Webb's forces have them completely surrounded. It's not even a battle anymore. It's just cleanup," Chen nodded slowly. She had known Marcus Webb long enough to understand his thinking. He wasn't just trying to win a military victory. He was trying to break Catherian will to fight so completely that they would never threaten humanity again. Aboard the Eternal Victory, Warcast Vexthor stared at tactical displays that showed the destruction of his mighty armada. 2/3 of his ships were already gone, and the remainder were being picked off one by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Warcast, his communications officer reported, "We're receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Put it through." Admiral Webb's face appeared on the main screen. He looked calm, professional, almost bored. "Warcast Vexthor, I believe we need to talk." Vexthor's claws scraped against his chair. "You dare to contact me in the middle of battle?" "What battle?" Webb asked mildly. "I see a massacre. Your fleet is being destroyed, your empire is in chaos, and your sacred hall of victories is a pile of rubble. I'm offering you a chance to surrender before you lose everything. Catherians do not surrender. Then you'll die. All of you. Right here, right now." Webb's voice remained perfectly calm. "Is that really what you want? To be remembered as the warcast who led his entire species to destruction because he was too proud to admit when he was beaten?" For the first time in his life, Vexthor felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death, which was honorable, but fear of being completely, utterly defeated by an enemy he had underestimated. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders. Outside, human weapons continued to pick apart what remained of his fleet with methodical precision. "What? What are your terms?" he asked finally. Webb's expression didn't change. "Unconditional surrender. Complete withdrawal from human space. Reparations for the damage you've caused. And a formal apology to Ambassador Chen." The thought of apologizing to a human female made Vexthor's claws extend involuntarily. But as he looked at his tactical displays, he realized he had no choice. The alternative was the complete extinction of his species. "I accept your terms." The transmission ended, and suddenly the human attack stopped. The weapons platforms went silent. The Marines withdrew from Catherian ships. The Shadow Fleet held their positions but ceased firing. In the sudden quiet, Vexthor could hear the sounds of his dying fleet. Alarms, emergency communications, the screams of wounded warriors. He had brought 3,000 ships to destroy humanity. Less than 300 were still operational. 2 days later, Ambassador Chen returned to Concordia aboard a human medical ship. Her hand was still heavily bandaged, and she moved carefully, but she was determined to see this through to the end. The ceremonial hall where she had been maimed was now the site of the Catherian surrender. Warcast Vexthor sat across from her, his proud bearing broken by defeat. Around them, representatives from dozens of galactic civilizations watched in silence. "The Catherian Empire formally surrenders to the Terran Federation," Vexthor said, his voice barely audible. "We withdraw all claims to human territory and agree to pay reparations for our actions." Chen nodded professionally. "And the personal matter?" Vexthor's claws clenched, but he forced himself to speak the words. "I apologize for the injury I caused to Ambassador Chen. It was wrong to harm a diplomatic representative." Chen studied his face for a long moment. She could see the humiliation burning in his yellow eyes, the way his proud warrior spirit had been crushed by absolute defeat. A part of her felt sorry for him, but then she looked down at her bandaged hand and remembered the moment when he had deliberately destroyed it while his soldiers laughed and recorded her pain. "Apology accepted," she said, simply. The ceremony concluded with the signing of formal documents that would reshape galactic politics for generations. As the various delegations filed out of the hall, Chen remained seated, staring at the table where her blood had been spilled just days earlier. Captain Torres approached her carefully. "Ma'am, the medical ship is ready to take you home." "In a moment." Chen flexed her injured hand, testing the limited movement that surgery had restored. "Torres, do you think this was worth it?" "What do you mean?" "The war. The lives lost. All of this destruction just because one alien decided to hurt me." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, with respect, I don't think this was about you. This was about the message it sent to every species in the galaxy. That humans won't be pushed around. That there are consequences for attacking us.